If one considers the process of maturation, then I guess it's useful to consider it as a move from a state of being immature to being mature. And if you set up a set of binary opposites that would be consistent with that distinction, you would say, for instance, an immature person is impatient, they can't listen, they're subjective, they're irrational, they blame, they're irresponsible, they're inconsistent, they're dishonest, and they're unfair. Whereas by contrast, a mature person is patient, listens, is objective, is rational, is open-minded, is accountable, is responsible, is consistent, is honest, and is fair. Now, if we wanted to find a key that, in a sense, unlocks these sets of binary opposites, then we need to explore the issue of maturation from the point of view of viewing it as a process. And any process is an incremental move from a beginning to an end. So if you view maturation from that point of view, then the process of maturation is an incremental move from birth to death. And from the point of view of intent, this is very significant because at birth you've had nothing yet. So whatever you're going to get, you'll still get. Which means at birth the infant is yet to get in the most unconditional sense of the word. When you die, you can't take anything with you. In other words, when you die, you don't get anything. You give everything unconditionally. Now there is a challenge to this because one could say, listen, when I die, I don't give anything. Everything gets taken away from me. But that just in a sense asks us to explore the difference between giving something and having it taken from you. Let's say, for example, you have 5,000 rand stolen from you. And on the other hand, a neighbor of yours is in desperate need. He's about to lose his house. He needs 5,000 rand to forestall the bankers and to save the house. And you give the neighbor 5,000 rand to help him save the house. The question is there a difference in the experience? And clearly there is. You'll feel very disgruntled at having your 5,000 rand stolen from you, whereas you'll feel very good about yourself for giving the neighbor the 5,000 rand. And the distinction between those two experiences does clearly not sit in the 5,000 rand, it sits in your intent. In the first case, when the money was stolen from you, you didn't intend to give, which means you experienced that it was taken from you. Which basically means to say that the process of maturation is concerned with the process of the maturation of the intent to give. And the more unconditional you are, if you like, the more mature you become. Now, it's very important to understand that this is an incremental process. So one can also view it in a sense as various shades of grey, going from absolute dark, being here to get, to being here to give, absolute light. And if you consider the nature of grey, then clearly grey is a mix between light and dark. So what in a sense happens as you mature is that there's a change in the proportion of the mix of your intent. And what that means practically is that if that's me in any given situation, I can either construct my intent on what I'm getting, or I can construct my intent on what I'm giving. Now, the first thing that's true for immature people is that when an immature person walks into a situation, they'll construct their intent on their own expectation, which basically means we experience immature people as fundamentally selfish in how they deal with things, which is why we find them being impatient, why they can't listen, for instance, because if somebody's trying to explain something to you and you're answering them back, in other words, you only giving attention to your agenda and you're not listening to their agenda, they'll experience you as being completely self-interested. Listening requires you to suspend your agenda for the agenda of the other. And if you can't suspend your agenda, then clearly you're only giving attention to what's going on with you. You're only giving attention to what's going on in your subject. So people experience you as subjective, they experience you as irrational, they experience you as judgmental, and so on. Whereas a mature person, when a mature person walks into a situation, they don't construct their intent on what they're trying to get. They construct their intent on the contribution they can make in the situation that they're in, which basically means we experience them as fundamentally generous. They are patient. They can listen. They can suspend their agenda for the agenda of the other. And as a result, because their agenda is in, if you like, in their object, other people will experience them as objective, they experience them as rational, as being open-minded, and so on. What's further true for the distinction between immature people and mature people is that when an immature person walks into a situation, they will give attention to their own needs. In other words, they'll make sure that their own kind of requirements are covered, and in a sense, they'll behave in an expedient way. They won't take accountability for anything. They'll blame. They won't accept responsibility for anything, they'll be inconsistent, they'll be dishonest and unfair. Whereas when a mature person walks into exactly the same situation, they won't give attention to their needs. They'll ask themselves, well, what's the right thing to do here? What's the value that is operative in the situation that I'm in? When one is value driven, for instance, when you're honest, for example, you'll speak the truth when it is not necessarily in your interest to do so. In other words, you're able to take a bullet for something. You're courageous to act for something that's bigger than your self-interest. You accept accountability for the situation that you're in. You accept the responsibility for the situation that you're in. I mean, in a sense, if you consider the distinction between irresponsible and responsible people, when you consider somebody to be irresponsible, in a sense, what you're saying is that you believe that you cannot trust this person. When this person is faced with the distinction between what's right and what's in their own interests, they'll act in their own interest. They're irresponsible. Whereas if you're making the opposite call, you're saying that you believe that when this person is faced with the distinction between what's right and what's in their own interest, they'll do the right thing. They're responsible. Now, I'd like to further just explore this issue of how giving actually works, in a sense, in our incremental growth. So if we go back to this idea of growth being an incremental move from being here to get and give, and we feel like we stretched this process out a little bit so we can get some perspective on it, and then kind of look at what really happens, then in a sense, we're sort of, in a sense, ascending up a staircase. Because in any given situation, as we indicated, you can either construct your intent on what you're trying to get or what you're trying to give. So if you look at in any given situation, here this person is trying to construct their intent on what they're trying to get. Now, when you construct your intent on what you're trying to get from somebody else, that person's ability to withhold what you want gives them power over you. In other words, they define you. You, in a sense, become a victim. And in a sense, you get stuck. The situation defines you. Whereas the moment you act on the basis of what's the right thing to do, you are by definition acting for something that is bigger than your self-interest. That allows you to rise above yourself, and it allows you to take the next step forward in your growth. It is important, however, that we just remind ourselves that giving is not about being nice. It's about acting consistently with the generosity or the courage that's operative in the situation that you're in. So if a hungry child asks you for food, then giving means to give the child food. Whereas if a little old lady is being beaten up in a park by a thug, then the appropriate thing to do is to beat up the thug. So if we consider these two instances from the point of view of your behavior, then we have a behavioral contradiction. Because when you're giving in the scenario with a child, you were kindness personified. Whereas when you were giving with a thug in the park, you were brutality personified. But that's exactly the point. Courage, giving rather, is not about being nice. It's about being appropriate. And if we say giving is about being appropriate, it's about acting consistently with the generosity or the courage that's operative in the situation that you're in, then it has to mean that taking is about getting your logic wrong. So if the child asks you for food and you slap the child and we ask you, well, why on earth are you slapping the child? And you say to us, no, I mean, I'm being courageous. That's not courage. That's just selfishness. Whereas if the little old lady is being beaten up by the thug in the park and you grab her handbag out of her hand to give it to the thug, we say, what on earth are you doing? You say, no, I'm being generous. I mean, clearly that's not generosity, that's cowardice. Which suggests that giving is not about being nice, it's about acting consistently with the generosity and the courage that is operative in the situation that you're in. And we can therefore conclude that maturity means being here to give or acting consistently with the generosity and the courage that's operative in the situation that you're in.